Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So in this video, this is sort of a follow along to last night's Warhammer Weekly, where we had kind of a big rules discussion on several, we'll call them thorny issues or rules conundrums in the Age of Sigmar. And it made me think a lot about how I view rules, and especially the old argument of rules as written versus rules as intended, and why I think it's basically wrong. The whole thing is wrong. Either side is right. No one's right, and more or less the entire discussion is pointless. So there we go. Without too much more preamble, let's just get into it. We're going to talk about the 2 points of view and what I ultimately think is the right answer. And hopefully you agree. But we'll see. Alright, so rules as written. This is one of the classic two camps, right? The whole world must break down into two camps, as always, and this is one of them. So, rules as written says that, basically you should interpret the text directly as it's written. And whatever it says, that's how we play it. That's simply, we can't infer anything. Because who knows what maybe the intention was or what it really means or anything like that. All we have, the only evidence we have, is that this is what is written here on the page, and hence this is what we should do. Okay? And traditionally this is sort of summed up by the rules lawyer. There's a couple problems, though, with the rules as written perspective. Because, one, usually if this comes up as a distinction, it's coming up because the rules as they're written feel goofy or don't grok or make you, play in some kind of strange way, right? Where it's breaking the verisimilitude of the world or the general flow of the rest of the game or something. Often, not always. So this is a real exchange that happened between a player of D&D 5th edition and Jeremy Crawford, who was one of the lead designers of D&D 5th edition. And, I blocked it out, but if you're really interested, you can go search this out. It's not really that hard to find, but it's not my business to be sharing it, even though it's on the interwebs. So the person asks a question, okay? And Jeremy says an answer, and you'll notice he says rules as intended, right? And basically he gives an answer, and the person follows back and says, but you're the one who said this. How is that not right? There's a couple more tweets I cut off below this, which I find pretty humorous. So this is the designer of a game. This is a pretty clean edition of D&D. One of the designers of the games makes himself available to answer rules questions. And answered the question, and yet still the other person is wanting to go down this road. Okay? Because he isn't satisfied with the answer. Now, whatever the specifics of this, situation, the reality is, I don't think you can get more clear than an answer from the actual designer of the game. Here we have the actual intent, right? And yet, it's still not sort of enough. And the problem with rules as written is that often it's simply written in a way that is unclear. That's why we're having this discussion. So your interpretation of how the rules are written, that is to say, what is written here and what the meaning of those words are, may not be the same as somebody else. So oftentimes when people are having this debate between rules as written and rules as intended, they're both actually making a rules as written argument. They're just interpreting the words differently, and perhaps both fairly, right? Obviously there's a wide spectrum of situations, but certainly it's the case that this is sometimes true. So if we have multiple points of view that can both exist from the only evidence we have, which is the words on the page, and we're both trying to interpret them as written, then there's no help. Okay? And I hear some of you saying, I can hear it, but that just means the rule wasn't written clearly enough. Aha, I see. Okay, well, let's put a pin in that. We'll come back to that one. Instead, let's move to the other side of this coin for a moment. Rules as intended. So the people who tend to take the RAI, rules as intended, point of view, say that basically we should play the game as it's intended. We should use inference and context clues, basically, of how the larger game plays, how the surrounding rules work, and sort of use a common sense interpretation of what the designer intended. In other words, if everything in the game is telling you to act in some way, and then there's this weird rule that seems to tell you to act in the opposite, but it's unclear, well, we can probably assume that the intention was to keep acting in the same way, and that rule was just, perhaps not either written as well as it could be, or just simply was written in a different language in the way that made sense to the designer, but didn't make sense to the person who's reading it. And I will say this is traditionally a huge problem. People really underestimate this when you read rules. I will assure you, as I've mentioned before, I've been writing games for many years, more than 10 years now, and getting your intention clear to the players of your games is extremely difficult. Because to you, things are obvious. And I have multiple layers of when I write a book, of editors and developers who double check what I write. And yet still, all of us can still read it and think it's clear and our intention is clear, but then we pass it to some new person and they don't agree. Okay? And it's shocking how far down that can go. You can have layer upon layer of review and playtest, and you can still come to somebody who doesn't understand your intention with the words, because it's just the nature of language. And this little quote here is very fun. Like, principles and rules are intended to provide a thinking man with a frame of reference. Boy, I love that. That's a great little quote. I know nothing about that guy. Obviously, it's just a little meme I pulled off the internet. That guy could be a serial killer. I don't know, and it doesn't matter. I like what he said there. But the real challenge with intention is exactly what I just sort of tried to elaborate on, which is that you never really know what the author's intentions are, right? Again, I can use context clues, I can make reasonable guesses, I can come to a perhaps sensible conclusion, but in the end I still have no proof that I'm right. I'm still just making, at best, sort of inductive inferences, right? Okay. And so again, the fallback could be, as I sort of mentioned offhand, well, perhaps it just wasn't written clear enough. All right, so let's talk about that clear writing of rules. The answer is that is impossible in a game. In a game that is all cells and you want to play. And that is going to be a tough pill to swallow. Like, I am positive people are going to disagree with me on this. How could you not write rules clear enough, you may say? Of course you can. Don't be silly. No, you can't. Not every time. Sometimes, sure, but not all the time. The whole of a game cannot be written with every rule clear enough so that there is no contention. And I would like to prove that to you in the simplest way possible. This is the municipal code for jaywalking in the town where I live. What is jaywalking? It's crossing the street where you're not supposed to. I can explain that to you that easily, right? You and I both probably have a sense of what it means to jaywalk. Yeah? Like, you've done it. You know you've done it. You've been standing there, you've been standing in the street, you want to get across something on the other side, you look up and down the road, the crosswalk or the intersection is far away, and you're like, screw it, I'm in a hurry. You run across the road. For many years where I worked, I would quite literally do this every day because there was no direct path without walking, fairly around, like a more distance than I wanted to, especially in the winter up here in Ohio, than if I just went straight across the street. So I just went straight across the street, as did, by the way, hundreds of other people every day because it was to a huge office building. And every one of us was breaking this law. And we all knew it, right? Even though none of us could even begin to explain this law to you. Because this is how clear text is written. It's in legalese. Legalese is a form of writing rules that are clear. But here's the problem. It's still not clear because all of these laws get contested all the time. I'd like to draw your attention to one specific part of this. No pedestrian shall cross a roadway at a place other than a crosswalk. Highlighted, except in cases where crosswalks are an unreasonable distance apart. What does that mean? Right? What is an unreasonable distance apart? There's going to, if this is brought up in court, there's going to be a burden of proof that falls to show that it was unreasonable and why. Right? And why don't, and you might say, well, why didn't they just list a distance? 1,000 feet apart? 10,000 feet apart? 100 feet apart? Who would even know? How would you know when you're doing it? This is the only verbiage you can use, right? Because people don't carry around measuring tapes. So even this, which is written to be absolutely crystal clear and be able to hold up in court, still could easily have contention on it. And by the way, I would like you to, for a moment, imagine a gaming book written in this language. If you didn't just immediately bang your head against your table, you're doing pretty well. Nobody would buy this game. And I don't mean the game of jaywalking. People do that all the time. I mean a game written like this, because to be incredibly clear requires, especially at the level of complexity that most of war games have, which is what sort of prompted all of this, would require mountains of text. Instead, what happens is we all sort of accept to read things in a certain way because we're in a community and we all understand that the text works a certain way. So even if there's disagreement, in general, in most cases, we come together and say we all accept that what this means is, what A means is X. Regardless of its clarity, we all sort of have accepted it. Where the problems come about is when it seems to really break 50-50. In cases where it's like 70-30 or 80-20, it isn't usually as much of a problem. So in the end, I think it's just a completely wrong-headed discussion, but I think there is an answer. And that is rules as fun. My answer is that these are a game, these are games you're playing, and they're not meant to be rules discussions. That the entire act of rules discussions is more or less a flawed enterprise. I'm not saying never have a short discussion on it, because if it's truly a misunderstanding of the rules, you didn't read something, you didn't see that there was a section that did clearly explain this, okay, that's fine. So I'm not trying to shortcut all discussions and say that every single discussion on rules ever is wrong. That is absolutely not true. What I'm saying is that when you get into a serious rules discussion, I think the right answer is stop and ask yourself, can this be interpreted both ways legitimately? If the answer is yes, then stop worrying about what's written, stop worrying about what's intended, and choose what's fun. Talk to your opponent about what the fun option is. Hopefully you can both come to the same conclusion. And if you can't decide, do what, like in Age of Sigmar and D&D and 100 other games have told you to do, which is just roll a dice or flip a coin and move on. Right? Because who cares in the end? It's not that relevant to your life. And it's certainly not relevant to the exact game you're playing. The point of which was to play the game and have fun doing it. Right? In general, when it comes to like tournament level play or something, these kind of common issues are going to be decided in the tournament pack. And if they're not, or say in league play in the sort of league charter or whatever, if they're not, then just raise it with the TO or league organizer and say, this is I have a question on this. They will probably just update the rules to include it because they do not want to create the issue. Right? They want to have a clear answer. If you're playing somebody newer in that very rare pickup game or whatever, where you're literally playing someone for the first time, so neither of you have expectations, communicate early and communicate often. It's really what the right answer is. There's no reason to ever stop talking to your opponent and try to get a sense of what they find fun and communicate what you find fun. Be reasonable, be polite, and come to a fun conclusion and play the game you showed up to play, not have some sort of Oxford debate about the nature of the placement of a comma, right? So there you go. That's my opinion on the rules. It sort of was inspired by last night's Warhammer Weekly and thinking through these rules discussions. I will be very interested in your feedback. If you think I'm out of my mind, I fully welcome that. I look forward to your comments down below. Of course, as always, this is just one idiot's opinion, and you are more than welcome to disagree, and that's always fun. So please leave your comments below. Like if you like it. As always, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.